Alright, I would say all things considered, I've finally finished the waveform. Now as you can see on the screen, when I move this too fast, for some reason OBS cannot keep up with it, but it is very smooth. I'm gonna see if the issue is just like the screen capture. I think it is, because I would think it has to do either with the way the graphics environment, like the desktop environment works, or something else. So I'm gonna try to do oh, okay, you can do window capture, that's good. Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought removing the tabs would actually make me find it better, but let's see, because the one on the back right now is the desktop one. You see that? You see what I mean? So apparently if you use the screen capture, it doesn't actually properly capture it, but if you use the window one, it does work. Because the window is on the right, which is very smooth, and the screen is on the left. So what I'm going to do is just remove the screen and then keep the window here. Okay, so back to the video. One of the things I think I'm finally done with is the waveform. I took a couple days. I had to research some things like best way to visualize it, some ways to make it fast without updating it a lot, and so I settled on this design. Let's first start with the actual shape of it. Now I need to update the API for it, but I'm gonna probably release it right after that. So I'm using this thing called JavaScript custom elements. Custom elements.define. It allows you to register an element, which then allows you to handle things like when the element is added to the document and when it's removed. The reason I do this instead of a document observer is because this seemed to be a modern way of doing it. I don't know if it's like supported in every browser, but between me and you, I don't really care about outdated browsers. I think almost everybody these days is running either Chrome or some newer browser, and the only exceptions are people in places where technology is very restricted, so I would say like hospitals or something like that. But you can call me out if I'm wrong about that. And then what I do here on the right is I set the audio source, and I also have a variable for peaks source. Now, the peak source, if I go here to the website, the peak source is just an array of numbers. Now, you might actually be able to optimize this further by compressing multiple peaks inside of a single file before serving it to the user, and also instead of using this JSON, instead actually encode the numbers directly. Because right now we're using a single byte for every number, and I think compressing it into just raw bytes would be a lot more efficient. But it is very small, so it's really not that big of a deal. And then the sound really is just the sound location. Now I'm trying to use as little technology as is possible, so as little frameworks. And so what I've done is I've set the audio, let me scroll up here to the code. I've set the audio preload variable to metadata because in theory that should just fetch parts of information about the audio, but then force the browser to do range requests loading. And if I go in here into the network, now you might have to turn down your sound for this one. Let's see if I can find it here. So what it does is it gets partial content. Now I don't really know how exactly this is supposed to work, because it does get partial content and sometimes it makes multiple requests. So I think it has to do with how the browser interprets either the headers. But if I set the preload to none, I can do that right here. You can see it doesn't load the file, and then when it makes all these range requests. So I think the metadata part is either making it load all of it when it considers it a small file, or something like that. So I'm going to keep it at none. That's a good thing for the video to walk through. One of the issues I had with this, by the way, was that ASP.NET, especially the 10 version, has a broken map static files function. So it returns a range request. The result of the range request is okay, but then the content length is the size of the file, even though the returned data is actually much smaller, from what I understand. And so then you get a lot of noise, which kills your ears. So thank God I catch that before that would ever go into public, into production. Oh, by the way, this is only for the static server, the static files on the ASP.NET server. So I think if you get it from a bucket, like an S3 bucket, this does not happen. But be very careful with this stuff. I would almost say write in a check in a custom JavaScript to fetch these files that checks this data before it's ever played to the user. So this would never happen again. But it scared the living crap out of me. Alright, now in terms of how this thing is actually rendered, it's actually very simple. Now this looks like a lot, but really this is just a path. And it's using, let me find the exact word for it, because catmul, the catmul one, it didn't work on empty areas. But now I'm using a monotone cubic spline, which is safe for silence. And what it does is it generates these points, as you can see here. And then at the end, it basically just copy pastes it and does it the other way around. And then you complete the shape, and that is what this is. Now to get the seeking, the scrubbing here, to get the scrubbing going, what I do is I just have a mask overlay. Now, SoundCloud does it a bit differently. SoundCloud has a pretty complicated way of scrubbing. It seems to, based on how far the wave is playing, it also changes the colors, so you can always see where you're seeking. What I've done is, you can see it here, I just overlay on top of even the part that's playing. So it's not that fancy, but it does work. So for seeking and the playing, they're both masks, and they're both, every time the sound is playing, I'm doing a requestAnimationFrame, and then that sets the width of the mask. So what you're saving here, from what I understand, is you're saving the waveform needing to be recreated, which I think is very efficient. In theory, you could even save the path of the waveform instead of the peaks, but that might be a bit of extra data, so is it really worth it? I don't know. Hello again, it's me from the future. Yeah, if you were to save the path data, you could basically use the waveform SVG data as an image. And so if someone is not using JavaScript, you could still show them the waveform without all the interactivity. But don't let all of these edge cases stop you. Matter of fact, just ignore that there's people who have JavaScript disabled, because otherwise you will destroy your own momentum in creating these tiny widgets, because there's so many edge cases and so much to think about. It's me from the future. If you do want to save the path data and you're not turning it into an image, what you should think about in terms of performance is actually reducing the number precision that's used inside of this path class here. I've come to find that about 3 to 4 decimal places is sufficient for most browser resolutions. So instead of saving the entirety of this monster, you just save about 4 decimal places. So 0.0013 instead of 0.001307, etc., etc. And updating it is nothing more than just setting the mask. And then the rest is just using standard HTML audio manipulation, where I set the position based on where the cursor is and all of that. One of the things I wanted to do for this particular script is decouple the way the waveform is rendered from the actual audio playing, so that maybe at some point you could have a different visualization. But from my philosophy, I always say do one thing and do it really well. And so after I have fixed up the API, I will release this And then that's really that. Right, so by the way, if you were willing to do animations, you could just change the path on the fly using the peak data or wherever the cursor is or the play state is. You can do a lot of interesting things, and SVGs are surprisingly efficient and fast, so it's not much to worry about, but I'm trying to do as little as possible. The only extra thing you could really do to further increase the performance of this particular waveform preview is when you have multiple previews, you can compress the data in a single request. But also you can, instead of creating an audio instance per, I don't know if it's visible inside of the thing here. Instead of creating an audio object per waveform, you have a single shared one, which will also make it easier to preview multiple files at once. So instead of multiple being able to play, only one plays. Oh yeah, and one thing I did not add, which everybody might be wondering, is I did not add a play button because I'm thinking about keeping it just waveform related. If you wanted to add a play button, you would just add a button and then hook up the JavaScript to the waveform element and call the play or pause function depending on what it's doing. So again, I really want to isolate the waveform part so it's very flexible and only intended for one particular use. Okay, I just finished recording the video and I realized that the amount of path data inside of the SVG was ridiculous. And I thought to myself, why can't I just reuse path data instead of duplicating it 3 times? Well, turns out you can. And there's probably even better ways to do the approach I'm doing with like masking. I was thinking maybe you could mask a rectangle over the shape of the waveform instead of actually drawing the mask as the shape of the path. But anyway, so here's how it looks now. You have a definition here, which is defining the geometry just once, and then you can actually have just the mask, sorry, the use here, and it will actually reference the shape. So that's very nice. So now you've shrunk the actual document size by like 3 times. Anyway, as you go along, there's always like some improvements you can make, but I am dead set on releasing this today, so I want to get everything out of the way.